Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to Synchronicity Web TV. I am your astrologer and your host, Nadiya Shah, and this is your moment of synchronicity. And back again, very excited to share, to celebrate, and to enjoy my time with Michael Barwick and with you. Michael Barwick is hugely popular. I mean, he is one of my most requested return guests with Synchronicity Web TV. He has been a teacher with Synchronicity University, and I know so many of you love him, have asked him to come back, and now he has. Thank you so much, Michael, for being here. Welcome.
Always a pleasure to spend some time with you, Nadiya. Always.
And I'm so excited to talk to you about the Star of Hope today and so much more.
Yes, the Star of Hope, namely the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction happening on the winter solstice at 0 degrees of Aquarius. Very exciting. Reminds me so much of the times we spent having breakfast together in the early hours, discussing astrology, much to the amusement, I think, of our waiter, who was an alternative guy, if ever there was one, if I recall correctly.
Oh yeah, I loved just the energy in that place. We used to go to this very eclectic waiters kind of place. And that was a lot of fun for sure. And I remember, I've also said many times that you are my astrologer. Like you are one of the people I consider my astrologer. Every astrologer should have an astrologer, because that way you get this other perspective and it's like, oh, I hadn't considered that before, or that's interesting, right? You get those moments where you get to say that's interesting, and it is other astrologers who get to do that for us. And so I remember sitting at the table and you looking at my chart at your computer while we're eating breakfast, waiters going by, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun being able to and a great honor to look at another astrologer's chart and provide, a different perspective, some insight, another dimension, something that's overlooked. Quite often when it comes to doing our own work as astrologers, I mean, obviously, our own chart is our laboratory. We learn so much from watching our own transits and so forth. But in terms of getting kind of the bigger picture of where we are in our lives, there are times when it's advantageous to consult somebody in the field who can sum up more objectively what's going on with you, particularly if you're the kind of astrologer who suffers from that disease called transititis, right? Which is like, oh my God, such and such a planet is going into such and such a position, and I'm so worried about it. Fret, 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 fret.
Fret, exactly. That's the word.
Fret, fret, fret. Well, it's part of it's an occupational hazard because you can worry yourself into the worst possible things you can imagine coming out of a challenging configuration, rather than looking at it instead as a point of power to be able to make changes or change course or move in a different direction than you had before, or see things in a different way than maybe you had seen up to this point.
Yeah, it's enlightening, certainly. And I do think that there's so much in the chart. There's so much to learn about astrology. It's almost like one lifetime isn't enough. And I have been staring at my chart for many, many years, something like 25 years I've been staring at my own chart at least. And there's still new things to discover.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That's why having an astrologer that you're working with as the transits and progressions go by and you see parts of yourself unfold in time, brought out by predictive factors or forecasting factors, if you prefer. These are all opportunities to grow more deeply into oneself and become more fully the person who you were intended to be. And we as astrologers have this enormous advantage because we have this statement of cosmic intent in terms of who the individual was meant to be. It's a great.
I mean, and it does sort of prepare you. Like if you know something really tough is coming up, and you know that it can go in all kinds of directions, you can, by your own approach to it, steer it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, meet the planet halfway, right? Instead of going kicking and screaming into dealing with whatever it is, rather, working with the energy at hand. And the truth be told, you need the transit that's happening to you. I mean, that sounds very blithe and almost like a new agey Pollyanna type statement, but I've seen it over and over again. You know, one client who was having the Saturn Pluto conjunction on their moon and came to see me in a consultation.
Ooh, okay. Bless that person. Saturn, Pluto conjunction on their moon. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So all I said was, you really need to clean house. That's what I said to her, right? And she said, that's so true. My mother died and I inherited all of her stuff. And my husband's father died and we inherited all of his stuff. And now there's all this stuff in my home. The basement is stocked full of all of this furniture and we can't move around because it's full of all of this stuff. So literally it was true that the person needed to clean house. I meant it more figuratively in terms of, you know, more metaphorically. But in fact, for the client in that moment, in your particular identification of astrology realized to interpret Saturn Pluto on the moon as representing a need to clean house, that happened to be so apt for the literal truth of her condition when I gave her that interpretation.
It's remarkable. I know. It's
Yeah,
speaking truth. That's what it is. It's when you touch on truth for the client, like
right.
Jeffrey Cornelius calls it a realized reading, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Moment when you're, I got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Very
you've
validating. It's very validating for people to have an astrologer speak to them in such a truthful, and by truthful, I don't mean straightforward, that's fine, but I mean when you are with an astrologer and they touch on truth, it is deeply validating.
Well, it's affirming, often in a way that the person understands immediately, but may not necessarily have had the words to articulate it the way you have. Or no one's ever said it to them or backed them up on something that they felt intrinsically to be true about themselves. And just on that level of affirmation, astrology is healing, I believe.
Yeah, and right now, I think that's part of the reason that astrology is such a phenomenon at the moment. I mean, look, astrology is always here. It always has been.
Yeah.
It adapts, it responds. It is a living practice. It is what the people need it to be in any given cultural or historical context. But it is interesting, and I think a part of it is Neptune in Pisces. But we do see this sense of more and more people being drawn to astrology, wanting that connection or validation or whatever they're looking for. You can see it, and especially over the last few years, you can see how much a force astrology has become in the world.
Well, I think it's fair to say that even though we've seen sort of participation in traditional religious forms decline in the West, the longing for spirituality and spiritual connection has never been greater.
Mm.
And you know, and people are looking for answers. People are looking for ways to understand their experience. And astrology provides a very powerful model, just on its own in terms of understanding one's psychology, one's makeup, one's temperament and such, one's talents, one's challenges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The infinite amount of information that's contained in a birth chart. But also this added capacity of being able to identify opportune seasons for the ripening of certain potentials to come into actualization. And when those potentials are available to you, then you can do things with that particular principle. And in fact, you better do something with it because you're meant to, right? Like from our perspective as astrologers, it's like if you're having a hard aspect to your sun, well, your sun's got to get moving and doing stuff because that's what's being asked of you. You know, that's
Living
what's
in
being asked of you.
alignment. Living in alignment is what it comes down to.
Yeah, living in alignment, yes, and working with what is being provided to you.
Mhm.
You know, to your working it to your advantage. You know, or as Caroline Casey's book was titled, "Making the Gods Work for You." Maybe not quite that far, but generally the sense of cooperating with the will of heaven as opposed to getting in the way of it, and resisting it and saying, no, I'm not going to do it. And then you being forced to do it. You're dragged into it. It's most unpleasant.
Yes, we love Caroline Casey. She's so brilliant. I adore her.
She is.
Yeah. So do you remember when we sat down to breakfast? And I don't remember what year it was, but I remember coming in and saying to you, have you seen 2020?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that experience. I don't remember when it was, but it was years before. And certainly with the alarm, with the alignment, and you weren't the only one. I mean, a lot of astrologers looked at, Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, Pluto, Mars, Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, Mars, Pluto, like all these conjunctions in Capricorn, and expressed concern in terms of what kind of events it would precipitate. I was approached to elect a time for a wedding in 2020, and I said, "Don't get married in 2020." That was what my advice was to that.
The whole year. The whole year.
The whole year. Yeah.
I know. We had Venus retrograde just as Venus was leaving shadow. We had Mars entering shadow. So there's that just on a level of marriage. And then the big Capricorn energies as well, right?
Yeah, right. All the heaviness, all the energies tied up with boundaries and the piercing of boundaries, the rupturing of boundaries, right? Which is this sort of virus getting past our defenses and, either physically or country boundaries, or piercing through the limits and infection, and us having to try to contain and manage these intrusions into our normal consensus reality, which was not so long ago profoundly different than what we're living today. It's now I find myself watching movies on television, and it's like they're on the subway and they're not wearing masks, like it looks funny. It's a profoundly different world, and how long it will be a profoundly different world, science doesn't have an answer to that in terms of knowing. What we do
astrologically, what do you think astrologically?
Well, this is where we get into my whole idea of the Star of Hope, which is the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, and it's just so important for a plethora of reasons. First of all, because it's the
winter solstice of 2020.
Yes,
that's taking place. Yes.
Yeah, on the 21st of 2020. Whatever it is in the afternoon, I believe it's in the afternoon. It's happening, and it happens only once. Now, you can actually see, if you go out at night and if you know where the planets are, you can actually see Jupiter's. It's not like it will suddenly be somewhat different on the 21st. Jupiter is approaching Saturn, and has been for some time, and they're getting closer and closer in the sky. But it's important because, first of all, it's the first major conjunction after all these Capricorn alignments, right? Like that's, all these Capricorn conjunctions, this is the first conjunction in a different sign. So just by virtue of that, it's significant. It's significant because it's at 0 degrees of that sign. So it makes an aspect to the world axis, which is the sextile, right? Providing this sense of that there's an opportunity in this, right? If we participate.
So explain the world access to people, because I know that there are people of varying proficiency levels where it comes to being students of astrology. Explain the world access quickly.
Well, the idea is, I think, more of a modern one, but it does have antecedents in the tradition, I believe. And the idea is that 0 degrees of Aries, the very beginning of the zodiac, represents the axis of the world. And things tied to that point say something important to the planet on a global level. That's the lore of the Aries point, or the world axis. So anytime you have something at 0 degrees, it makes a connection of some kind to 0 degrees of Aries. So this conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn is happening at 0 degrees of Aquarius, which makes this harmonious aspect, a 60-degree aspect called a sextile, or I believe you talk about it in terms of it has a conversation with the world axis, which is a harmonious one, a stimulating one, but it is one that is opportunity, in that it doesn't provide automatic achievement of anything, but it provides an opportunity for something good to come out of effort spent, is what it points to. And certainly the promise of that is, a call to participation, a call to coalesce around the whole, a call to be united with all of humanity. That's very much the flavor of the conjunction.
Because it's Aquarius, the
Well,
Aquarius.
then it's an Aquarius,
yeah.
right? Then it's an Aquarius. So
Which
we can
is
talk
about
about,
humanity and the collective,
yeah.
but also very individual at the same time.
Well, it's about the group, the dynamics between the individual and the group, and how can the individual have expression in a group context? Because often it's the Aquarian that'll take the contrarian, Aquarius contrarius will take the contrarian view in a group discussion. Oh, by the way, I think this, and everybody looks at them like, what? Just because they can, just because they want to express a particularly unique point of view. So there's this dynamic in Aquarius around the unique individual, but there's also the dynamic of it wanting to participate in the larger group collective about, one's network, one's associations, one's colleagues, one's friends, right? Very important word, one's friends. We understand it from the Facebook context, but one's actual real connections to people that are significant.
With Saturn, it's got to be real.
It's
Yeah.
got to be real.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be real, that they're there for you through thick and thin kind of deal. And have a different dynamic than a seventh house relationship, a Libra type relationship. So Aquarius is the life of the group. It's the life of the friend. It's the life of the colleague. It's humanity. It's the global family. It's the vision of, it's also related to, it's kicking off this phenomenal series of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in the element of air. Since 1842, Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions have been happening in the element of Earth, with one exception, which was 1980. The conjunctions of 80, 81 were in Libra, but otherwise, the conjunctions were all in the element of Earth. Well, now that you have a mutation year, which is before it switches over, which was 1980, 81, that was in Libra, and then now we're in Aquarius, and now until 2099 or whenever it is, it's for 180 years, it'll be Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions will always be in the element air. So this implies...
Yeah, that's a huge deal. That is a very huge deal.
That's a very huge deal. So it'll be Aquarius, Libra, Gemini, Aquarius, Libra, Gemini, on and on and on. And then there's a mutation into Scorpio, and then 2 more in Aquarius, and then it's done. So for the rest, it's one of the things that we do as astrologers, particularly as we age as astrologers, we start to look at time periods beyond our own lifetimes, right? We start to look at what the world to come will look like that we will not see. We won't see this. But
I want to live. I mean, look, I believe, my feeling is that our soul continues to live, whether you want to call that reincarnation, whether you want to think we go on to another space or another realm. I do believe that, but I think it would be really, really cool to be in the same body for like 150 years. Ever since I was a little kid, I used to say, I want to live till I'm 150 years old.
Well,
so we'll see. Because all this Aquarius energy, it does speak to, advances in technology and consciousness and all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's the business cycle will be tied to the virtual world, the world of the mind, the world of the abstract, the world of thought and discussion and ideas. More towards the line of meritocracy in terms of what certificates you have, what degrees you have, what you can prove that you can do on the basis of your accreditation. more professionalization, more codification of expertise, and so forth. All these kinds of things we can expect with ongoing Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions of learning and development in the airy realm for decades upon decades. It will be a very intellectually stimulating time in global history. In terms of what we'll learn, what we'll do. And I mean, people are already talking about this. This is the great thing about what we do, is that the planets and the stars do not make anything happen. They merely reflect what is already in
They are a
progress.
mirror, exactly.
And it's already in progress, right? They're already talking about AI. What's it going to be like if we get a machine that's conscious, right? That'll be an encounter with otherness that we've not seen before, a consciousness that is machine-based. What would that look like? What kind of interaction will that produce? What kind of world will we have with the kind of genetic manipulation technologies that we have, and what's the impact and the implications for that? How are we going to address the global issues that we're facing, that humanity is facing? I think that 0 degrees is the beginning of where we get serious, or at least the opportunity to get serious about the circumstances in which we find ourselves, and the need to apply science and logic and reason, as you know, Nadiya.
And for better or worse, once Pluto gets there, right? For better or worse.
Well, this is, like Pluto there is, that's a whole other thing. That could be the thought police. In terms of, you're going to believe what we say, you're going to believe. I don't know though.
You
Air
think
is,
so? That's how you see that?
well, it could be. It could be. We could see sort of the shadow of Aquarius in a way, like in terms of, in terms of, I'm not doing this because I think it should be ABC. I'm doing this on the basis of the principles that I'm following. So in other words, you can't park here because you don't have a parking decal. So you have to go to the parking office. You have to pay your $25.95. You have to get a parking decal. You have to put it on your windshield like thus, and then you're allowed to park. That's Aquarius. Right? That's, the collective principles and what you have to do to follow the rules. Not because some king has, by whim, has told you that it has to be. No, because on the basis of collectively held principles. That's the worst of it. But the best of it, though, is that Aquarius is the sweet waters of reason, right? That's the water the water bearer carries, is the sweet waters of reason, as opposed to the salty waters of the ocean where, more irrational creatures live. No, the water bearer is sweet water, and it's very much something that nurtures the intellect, nurtures the mind, nurtures our way of logically being able to apprehend the world around us.
There is a brilliant writer whose work has made such an impression in my life. His name is Daniel Pink, and he's written all kinds of books where he explores like society and trends, and he's brilliant, very practical as well, like how you can actually use the different things that he's talking about. One book that I really loved of his that I read over and over again was called Free Agent Nation. And that book was written decades ago, and it was all about how the future economy is going to be rooted in self-employment, contract employment. That's exactly what we ended up manifesting, right? This whole gig economy thing, very rooted in this idea of you are your own boss, you are your own person. It isn't that you work for a company and have an agreement with them, but rather you are sort of a free agent, right?
Right.
And for a time, you may decide to work on a project and then you go away. He has another book, and I forget the name of it, but it's basically the subtitle is How Right-Brainers Will Rule the World. And he talks about how the future economy is all idea-driven, driven, creativity-driven.
Yeah.
That's the future economy. And so I understand, and I have a lot of compassion for people who maybe are not necessarily intellectually driven. That's okay. We all have different skills and different strengths. Some people are really good where it comes to putting things together and manufacture and working out things on a more earth plane. And that has worked well with all these star of hopes, great conjunctions over the last 200 years in earth signs. But the economy has already begun to shift in very profound ways. And I think it's only going to accelerate once that great conjunction takes place.
Well, now we've demonstrated that there's all these companies that said that they couldn't possibly have their whole workforce remote and get anything done, can in fact get things done with their whole workforce remote. So the whole being in the office is demonstrating that you're getting work done idea is really shattered forever in terms of, so this one's virtual identity will become, a part of one's work identity, or work identity becomes more virtualized. And there'll be days, I'm sure, that some will be in and some will not be. But then we also see some companies are working with organizations offshore. So they virtualize the work right out of the office that they're in, because the telecommunications technology allows for us to be able to do that, to be able to do that. But I think that the virtualization of one's work life, we've also seen we've seen the virtualization of one's private life, but I think more along the lines of Ready Player One is in our future.
What do you mean by that, Ready Player One?
Have you seen the movie Ready Player One?
No, what is that about?
Well, Ready Player One, I'm not going to get into the whole complexity of the movie, but it represents a time in the future when people spend their free time in a virtual place called the Oasis as much as they possibly can, amusing themselves. That's what they do, playing games and going after, various kinds of amusements and, of every conceivable kind and variety. And the story goes through the adventures of one character who, there's this contest to find an Easter egg or a series of Easter eggs in the virtual environment, and then therefore you'll inherit the virtual environment and be able to run it forever, as the stockholder, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it's all very material. The trouble with our films today is they're so materialistic in terms of the way they envision things. But anyway, the idea is very cool. He's going through looking for clues about the guy who originally invented it, to find the Easter egg, to be able to win control of this virtual oasis where people spend the vast majority of their time. We're already seeing VR headsets come down in price. I think people are going to, fly around virtually. They're going to, go to virtual bars and talk to virtual people. And I think that will be part and parcel of your personal life will be virtualized too. I mean, maybe not this century, but I think we'll see things move in that direction, because in a small way, in terms of, we've already seen that with our phones, right? Like where our lives are our personal lives are virtualized around the messages that we send via, the various platforms of our choice.
I just realized, with Aquarius having such a strong duality to it, it is also very possible that many of us, because like, for example, it is said, I think it was a philosopher named Shirley Turtle who said, Facebook isn't you, it is a performance of you.
Yeah,
so it's like this one part of us that we put out there on social media and in whatever platform we find ourselves in. And just like we have always had like sort of different selves we bring to different roles, it is the same where it comes to like our online world and our in-person world, and how much more fragmented that may become as we move more and more in a virtual space, or start living more and more in a virtual space, will be very interesting. But the other thing, I wanted to mention was there is this show called Years and Years. It's on HBO, Years and Years. And in the premiere episode of this show, this young girl, she must be, an adolescent or so, she comes to her parents and she says to her parents, I have to tell you something really difficult. I think I might be trans. And her parents are like, well, you know what? We love you. We accept you, whatever gender you feel or non-gender conforming you feel you want to be, you are loved. And the daughter looks at them all confused and says, no, I'm not transgender. I'm transhuman. And then she starts talking about how she wants to upload her consciousness into the cloud so that she can live
Yes,
in
yeah,
the cloud. Yeah. I mean, it's just so interesting. Then her parents really freak out, right? Then they're like,
right,
oh
yeah.
no, yeah. So fascinating. And you wonder, Age of Aquarius are we going to go to that extreme? It's possible.
Well, that's the genetic, the genetic recoding that we can do stuff
Yeah.
to tweak our genetic code to, for example, banish old age, what the consequences of that might be,
Mm.
right? In terms of what happens if we really do live, can push the model to say 250, 150 years, 250 years. What happens when you have a population that's been around for 250 years?
It would be awesome,
That's,
though. It would be so awesome. I would love it.
well, it would create different sets of problems. It would create the question, of course, with Aquarius quite often is it really going to be for everyone, or is it going to be for the privileged elites,
Mm.
right? Who are specially able to have access to this technology, this capability, this freedom. I mean, as we know, life isn't fair. Air signs believe life should be fair.
Yeah.
Um, they all believe that, although Gemini, fair is a relative thing in Gemini's case. But
What do you mean by that? For Gemini, fair is a relative thing.
well, what's fair? My perspective on fair might be different than your perspective on fair. We need to talk about it. We need to confer. We need to communicate. We're Libras, Germans, you need to come to an agreement. And Aquarius is like, these are the truths that upon which the people are bound together, and what we hold to be, what we hold to be true, what we hold to be um, the things that bind the society together as a group, or bind even larger things, bind the nations together as a group, bind the world together as a group in that very sort of abstract intellectual sense of it.
And so, what
um,
makes the Star of Hope hopeful?
well, the Star of Hope is hopeful because it's a new energy, and something new after all we've been through has got to be better than what we've been going through so far.
Mm.
Right? It's something new. Second, it by itself, it represents the sociocultural response, right? We've had Saturn confronted by Pluto. We've had Jupiter on Pluto. We had Mars go through there. Now we're having Jupiter Saturn, which is the sociocultural response in a new sign. So that in itself is hopeful. It's hopeful that it's 0 degrees. There's a definite opportunity to do something good here collectively, to wake up and do something good collectively. With that,
Mm.
it's hopeful because it's kicking off 180 years of air sign conjunctions of Jupiter Saturn. So if we take the long-term view, longer than you and I probably have, the air realm is going to be developed. We're going to do the learning around that element, and that will yield fantastic, not just only fantastic technology, but maybe more understanding, and maybe something cooler than what we've had. The temperature has been so hot in terms of the rhetoric that's being used and cast around these days, that perhaps these successive conjunctions in air will bring a more level-headed coolness to the social discourse, and a more reasonableness, not that there won't be different, of course there's going to be differences of opinion, of course they'll be discussed 6 ways through Sunday, but at least there will be some quality of respect for the players in the game, and that there'll be a discussion as opposed to no discussion happening at all, really just talking past each other.
Mm.
um, I think so. For that reason, it's hopeful. And then it's in Aquarius, and I mean, without getting into all the mechanics of when is the age of Aquarius going to begin, or is it going to begin, and this whole idea of the notion of Aquarius. Nevertheless, Aquarius isn't just another sign. It's the sign of the dawning new age, or the age that's arrived, or that's going to arrive. And most would argue that it's definitely going to arrive in the next 180 years or so. So So the fact that we're seeing a conjunction in Aquarius is, a call to, the best qualities of that sign, which are around, the fraternal, nature of humanity and the common elements that we share together, and looking past the differences that separate us and looking more towards the things that are common and unite us. That's the spirit of it. So that is the hope that is heralded by that. And I believe that energy is around if you look. I don't think it's all that far away. I think that there's just as much as there are chaotic elements in the world that are seeking, are playing destructive games of madness and mayhem. There is the other side that is attempting to bring people and places together. And I don't think, and I think that the long-term game is on that side of the equation, because we've only got one world. There isn't a plan B. There's no Earth plan B. Mars is not habitable in any way that we understand it, and won't be with the technologies that we have available to us. So one world, one people, one planet, we need to work together. And that the sense of the Aquarian age is very much, there is this participation in our global responsibilities to our fellow creatures and to the planet. But there is also the polar opposite sign, which is always important in terms of the ages, which is Leo, which is all about one's creative expression, one's actualization of self, and one's development of what? Consciousness, of greater consciousness and awareness of self and the fullness of what oneself is. Or it's not going to work. If you have unconscious people participating in a group process, you're going to get an unconscious group. Right?
I mean, if you have unconscious people, you're going to get an unconscious. What do you mean by unconscious? You mean like people on automatic or unwilling to consider larger perspectives?
Well, I'm unconscious in the sense that they've grown to a certain point in terms of who they are, and they have not fully grown into, for whatever reason. Now, this is not a judgment thing, because poverty interferes with people being able to actualize their potential. And some people are impoverished from the womb forward, right? Like, that's the reality of it.
I truly believe, so often I have thought about how so much of what we are able to become is based on the opportunities available to us, based on what choices we had available to us. And I think it is so dismissive of people when they say, well, you manifest your reality. Well, yes, you do, when you are in a given context, right? When you have the opportunity to self-actualize, when you have the opportunity to manifest. But the truth is, there are many, many people in this world who may never know that because of the circumstances and the context that they find themselves in.
Right, and it's a great tragedy.
Yeah,
it's a great tragedy. But in the world of tomorrow, the world of tomorrow is that people are going to be educated about this stuff. People are going to be knowledgeable about this stuff. People are going to take responsibility for the growth of their own personal development beyond finishing whatever university degrees they finish. Right? We're not talking about book smarts here. We're talking about the experience of fully understanding the depths of one's own nature. And without that knowledge, I mean, it's something that comes with time and experience if you're lucky, right? If you're fortunate, if you have, you meet the mentor, right? It's like, you're guided to just the right book at the right time. You connect at the right course, and you meet somebody at that course who connects you to somebody else. Like, the whole chain of events are really kind of a piece when you look at it. It's a tapestry of things that lead you to where you are today. But
it's interesting because I remember when I was in university many years ago, we were studying and looking at the fact that in Canada, um, we actually need to have more immigrants. And one of the reasons is because Canada has one of the most educated populations, right? More people in Canada, percentage-wise, are likely to have a degree or an advanced degree, like a master's or a PhD,
Yeah.
than just about like many, many other countries out there in the
Yep.
world. But what is also a phenomenon here in Canada is that those people who are born and raised here, who do go on to get a degree, are much more likely to leave the country, to spend time
Mhm.
outside the country, to immigrate out of the
Mhm.
country as
Mhm.
well. And that creates that space where we actually need to have immigrants and people coming in, because there are roles that are needed that our own Canadian population decides they're going to take those skills elsewhere. And that's okay. Like, I actually think that's a beautiful thing, because that only makes Canadians as a whole, no matter where they are in the world, it makes them that much more richer, that much more able to be ambassadors to Canada, able to expand perspectives. And it is part of why we as Canadians identify ourselves as having very different values than our neighbors to the south. And,
Right.
we may be one of the only countries in the world that is constantly comparing ourselves to our neighbor, right?
Well,
Like,
it's kind of unavoidable,
yeah,
as Pierre Trudeau said, when you're in bed with an elephant, it's difficult, it's difficult to ignore the elephant, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's the reality
I
of it.
love that he said that. And he said
Yeah.
a lot of cool things with using that bedroom bed metaphor. Yeah, he did.
It's the cultural difference. Well, the cultural difference is Canadians tend to be fair, I think we tend to play it up more than it is. I think there's a lot of states. The fact that we're having, I think the fact that we're having a Jupiter Saturn conjunction for Christmas
Yeah,
is a video. Like it is something,
yeah.
you know. Um,
For the winter solstice.
for the winter solstice, right? Like
It's a
that
huge
is
thing.
remarkable.
Yeah.
That is saying that there's a new sheriff in town. There's a new authority coming into being,
Mm.
and it may not be today, and it may not be tomorrow, but someday and soon. All those Jupiter Saturn conjunctions over time, building up this sense of the necessity for communication, for dialogue, for discussion, for thinking about
Things
considering the whole.
rationally. Yeah, thinking about
Yeah.
things rationally, science and trusting science and looking at
Yes.
things
Yeah.
empirically. Yeah.
Right. And getting away from the kind of Neptune and Pisces conspiracy theories that have run rampant.
Hmm.
I mean, there's talk. Some astrologers believe that Neptune rules Pisces, and if that were true, Neptune and Pisces should be all about the most mystical kinds of truth, erupting all around us. And that's not what's happening. What we're getting is QAnon and crazy, mad schemes of what's going on in the world that has nothing to do with reality. It's
Well, that could also,
mass delusion.
yeah, that could be Neptune and Pisces too. But then there's also this awakening of people wanting like a mystical experience through
Yes.
astrology,
Yeah.
through tarot, through all of these, divinatory tools and means. People are drawn to it that much more because there is that mystical yearning right now.
They don't trust the politicians. They don't trust the corporations. They don't trust science. They don't trust religion. They're looking for means to discern their own truth. And all those tools, whether they be astrology or tarot or the I Ching or the runes or whatever, provide means of getting information, spiritual information that's tailored to your own personal experience. That's pretty irresistible. That's a pretty irresistible thing, to be able to have insight that's tailored to who you are based on, your date, time, and place of birth, in terms of in astrology, or the cards that you draw in tarot, or the hexagrams you throw in the I Ching, or the runes you cast, or whatever. find yourself in that mirror. You see yourself through that lens, and are able to come to certain conclusions on the basis of it. And it's profound. These are profound tools in the right hands. I worry sometimes that sometimes I tune into amateur forums on Facebook, and I read how people are interpreting symbols, and I go, oh my goodness. There's a lot of misconceptions out there in terms of how astrology works. I find, even though astrology is a big thing and there's more people reaching for it, there's an awful lot of misconceptions about what we do, and why it's important, and what it can do for people.
Astrology is powerful. Yeah, for sure.
Like just the sun sign stuff, it's like without any discussion at all, it's been decided that a sun sign gives you a certain set of traits. Like we didn't engage in any philosophical discussion whether this was the case. This was just decided that this was the case. And everyone just sort of says, well, Virgos are neat, as if all Virgos are neat, which is, some Virgos are neat and some are not. Trait theory as a psychological model is by itself a sort of questionable, that people have traits that endure over time, and that's questionable. Whereas to me, a sun sign it's a plan for individual development, is what it is. It doesn't make you anything, by itself. It's what you make of it is what matters. What you do with that potential and grow into it and being who you are is what is important, rather than what it dictates. It doesn't dictate who you are. That's how I see it.
Was there anything else you wanted to share or talk about while I have you here?
Well, while you have me here, my goodness.
I miss you. I miss our breakfasts. I miss spending that time. I think Ontario right now, parts of Ontario, including the part of Ontario that you are in, is going into lockdown. Well, not lockdown. That's the wrong way to put it. A modified phase 2. They're going a little bit towards greater restrictions because there's been a surge of cases.
Yeah.
And so it is, it makes it harder for us to get together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're like everyone else. We have mediated communication. We can't go out to brunch or breakfast. We have to have a Zoom call and discuss, the various things that are going on. I think, we didn't talk about Jupiter. Jupiter's going to go through Aquarius lickety split at such a high rate of speed, and go into Pisces before dipsy doodling back into Aquarius again, and then going back into Pisces. So I just think that whole time period of Jupiter racing through Aquarius is the insights, the revelations, the intellectual perceptions that will come out of that 4-month period will be profound in terms of what we'll be learning just collectively.
Yeah, and I'm also hopeful that it does bring some scientific developments where it comes to the virus vaccine.
Well, that's I think that's the hope for that's the big hope for all of us, is that out of this, when we look at something happening in Aquarius, which is so closely associated with science, with reason, with logic, with rationale, with the nerd in the lab coat with the test tube coming up with the solution to the problem.
Hey, they are the coolest people out there. Yeah,
they're the coolest people out there. It's like
I work for nerds unite.
I'd work for Fauci tomorrow. Like we're hoping that they will, rescue our acorns and come up with a solution. And the word is, from what sources I have in that realm, I can't say that I have many sources in the realm of immunology, but from what I've heard, they're very encouraging results, both in terms of immune system response and in terms of treatments for the virus itself. So So I think it's just it's a matter of time and patience for us to, stay safe, do what we need to do, check in with folks. We get lost in our own bubbles, I think, and we sort of lose track that not everybody has a collective of people that they're living with. So I think it's important that we check in with folk and we communicate with folk, and that we start living this virtual life, and participating that way. And eventually, someday, the war will be over, and we'll be dealing with COVID, in terms of whatever that world looks like. But I miss you too. I didn't realize you were back in Toronto. I thought you were still in Cancun until November.
Yeah, I just finished mandatory quarantine a few days ago, and I figured I would come now, spend as much time as I can before there are, more restrictions that start to set in. I thought it would be a good time to do that, to come
Right.
see my parents, spend some quality time, and then head back to Cancun for a stay through the winter season.
Oh, you decided not to go to Vancouver?
No, well, everything's closing down again. Like
Right.
I had all these clients waiting, and then they started canceling, and it was like, what's the point? What is the point?
Mm,
So we'll talk about that off camera.
okay.
But Vancouver, I love Vancouver. I am looking forward. I'm hoping that in the spring, once things start to open up, that I get to spend quality time in Vancouver, because I just love it there so much.
It's a great town. I love
Yeah,
Vancouver.
yeah.
I love
Thank you,
Vancouver.
Michael. I
My
adore
pleasure.
you. I love you. I think that you're the most amazing astrologer, one of the most amazing
Mm.
astrologers out there, really. And I'm just so glad that you're sharing more and more people are getting to know you. And you are certainly one of the more popular guests that I do have on my channel. Of course, you would be. Naturally, you would be. Just,
Well,
just
I'm so
that-
glad. I'm so glad. It's been quite an experience having a video out there with my name on it, um, to do with astrology. It's quite an experience to have people contact me on the basis of our conversations together about all things astrological that we love so much. Um, I did want to ask you one question though. I've been reading. I don't know if you're familiar with the novel American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Have you heard
I've
of him?
watched, I love the show. I have
Oh,
seen
do you?
both seasons over and over and
Mhm.
over again. I love that show. It's one of my very favorite shows. Why? What's up with the novel?
Well, I read the novel yeah, because the novel came out, I don't know, I think 20 years ago. And uh, this it's very much, he's not the series isn't quite following the novel exactly in terms of the events of what's happening, but certainly the spirit of it is definitely in there, and the philosophy sort of underpinning Gaiman's kind of view of things, and very much we see this in American Gods. Since you've seen it a million times like I have, that this notion of belief conferring divinity is very strong in the series. It's like gods are gods because you believe in them. As soon as you stop believing in them, they lose some mana or whatever it is, some magic that it enables them to be able to do what they are. And this is a notion, this is a notion in the New Age community to some extent. It's like, well, believing is a magic all of its own. If you believe it, if then it's true for you, and then it's true for you, then it'll work. And I wanted to know whether you thought, that in fact, whether you think belief actually confers the divine or not.
I love that you asked me that question. See, this is so obvious how nerdy you and I are, that this is the kind of stuff we talk about for fun. I mean, it really is, to those who are wondering. But I remember Jeffrey Cornelius saying once, and he was one of my dear professors, and he said that the gods need us to remember them in order to be known more by
Right.
us and in the world. And they rely on our consciousness. They rely on our awareness in order to continue to live and expand and grow in the world. And there is something to be said for how awareness expands whatever it is that is being made aware of. And so
Right.
that would include divine energies, that would include
Right.
divinities. We can see it in our own lives, certainly, but for the collective as well, ultimately, I do think. And I think that this idea of us looking at the sky for omens, right, which is essentially what we're doing as astrologers, it is, whether overtly, but most often covertly, it is a philosophical affirmation in the ancient gods, in the sense of a world that is alive with meaning and purpose, and in the way in which we are complex, right? Like, it is astrology that is rooted in a polytheistic framework of the world. And of course, there were historical developments, like, for example, the Arab astrologers, the early Muslims who put astrology into a monotheistic context, which
Yep.
was then built on by the Renaissance priests who
Yep.
furthered that, and then, of course, the psychological astrologers
Yep.
more recently. But at its root, it has this understanding that the universe and we as expressions of the universe are complex. But that also means that the universe has a variety of divine energies, and that we are a manifestation of divine energies. We
Right.
are complex divine entities as well. And so, yes, I do think that our awareness magnifies a divine understanding of the cosmos around us, magnifies a more pluralistic understanding of divine energies as well. Yeah, I think that. What do you think?
Well, you know, there is this context in terms of the divinity as kind of a human invention. This is a very modern idea, right? This is a very modern idea, and very, if I will say, very late Piscean period, right? Like, in the sense that you know, the first part of the Piscean age, it was all about transcendental God, right? Like, God was up here and we were down there, and, you know, very much a very Platonic understanding of the divine relationship
Oh yes, and
to the human,
we see that
right?
historically, right? The dawn of the Piscean age was the Buddha, was Jesus Christ, was even Plato as well, Platonian ideas. So yeah.
Right, right. That all that very much that whole sort of thing. And then, you know, as we go deeper into Pisces, we get to the fish that swims in the other direction, which swims laterally. And that sort of corresponds to, of course, the great ocean voyages outward to the new world, which correspond to, you know, getting more instead of, you know, it was instead of thinking, well, this world doesn't matter, it's only the afterworld that really matters. It's known, let's study the natural world because it'll tell us more about the divine. So this changes, of course, the orientation of the West in the direction of science and in a more Aristotelian view. So now we have a world in which you know, which people who are familiar with the more transcendental understanding of things say it's flat. It's like it's a flat land that's lost its transcendental dimension to it. Astrologers, of course, we have an understanding of a transcendental dimension because as above, so below. There's a transcendental relationship between the principles that we study in astrology and how we relate them and communicate them in reference to life on this planet. But when it comes to the conferring of divinity, is it merely belief just because of human belief, or is there, you know, are there divinities outside of human belief, outside that transcend human belief? And this is because, of course, people from faith traditions might argue, you know, from different faith might argue, well, our God is the real God and the only God, and
But don't they need to do that for their survival? Like, just from a, you know, a logistical perspective, I guess you can say, from an organizational perspective, they need to evoke that level of, I guess, authority or truth or belief in order to ensure their power, I guess we
Well,
can
that
say,
seems to
right?
be the case during the age of Pisces. Before it was
Yeah.
like you could worship whoever you wanted to worship and it wasn't an issue, right? But after that, it was like religion started having universal claims, and Christianity is particularly, ours, there's no other way to salvation except Jesus and so forth, right? Universal and exclusive. Not only is Christ the only way, you can't be anything else. Where Islamic civilization in the golden age of the caliphates, you saw the dialogue between Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions academically and in terms of thought and idea and culture, because it was pluralistic in its approach to its civilization. It's only relatively recently in the West where we have come to a place where the state is truly separated from the church, and that faith is a matter of personal choice, and the state stays away from morality issues. And for depending on the nation, it works better in some places than others. I think Canada, we have a very profound protections in the charter that guarantee all kinds of rights for us, because we have a more modern document.
Yeah, it is very a powerful thing to see the ethos of a country, of a people, right? It should be fascinating. I mean, I'm thinking about, there are many thoughts that come to mind as I listen to you. I'm thinking about this idea of pluralistic societies, secular societies, how some nations do that better than others. Some nations have done that more kicking and screaming, whereas some have
Yeah.
just evolved in that direction. And I'm thinking about how what that actually means can be very different to people as well. But it'll be very interesting to see how we continue to develop. I think the discovery of Uranus really kicked all of this off, right? Kicked off this whole idea of the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
But I'm also thinking about, I am of the belief that you cannot have the discovery of Uranus without the Protestant Reformation. And you cannot have the Protestant Reformation without the printing press. And so I believe that as we realize new things about ourselves as human beings, about our consciousness, about our power, about our ability, it is the sky that reflects that in terms of how aware we become of the cosmos.
Right.
And so it isn't that we discovered Uranus and therefore all of a sudden democracy began. It was more like we were in a place in terms of our understanding of what it meant to be human, where we were ready for democracy, and the discovery of Uranus coincided with that. And in this way, I think we have a relationship to the unfolding of the cosmos. It is something that we participate in. That's why social context is so important when we consider what we are going to look at, what's going to happen, right? When we look at predicting, because that's what we do, we call a judgment. When we look at making these judgments, we have to take into consideration the social context, the historical context that we find ourselves in.
Right.
And so it's almost like the printing press made the word of God, right? Made the word of God more accessible.
Yep.
And because it was more accessible, it made it so that people wanted to read it. People had access to it in a way that they just didn't before. They just didn't have access to books. There was no reason really to learn to read. But then once books started becoming more prevalent, it was only natural that then you would want to read religious texts. And it was that disconnect between, well, I'm reading this and it means something to me and I can read it, and what is being interpreted to me, that really kicked off the Protestant Reformation. Because of the Protestant Reformation, that began to shift our understanding of what it meant to be human. And it is the beginning of the end of, monarch power. It is the beginning, the end of authority, the way that we knew it before. Because once you can decide what the word of God means, it makes the word of the king less applicable.
Yeah.
Because no longer are people born with a certain, innate innate sense of being better than everybody else, because you
Right.
yourself are right there on par having that relationship with God. It isn't anymore that the king is closer to God, for example.
Right.
And so it takes that in order to get to the place where you're able to then say, off with her head, let's
Yes.
get rid of the queen. That would have been unfathomable to the human consciousness years earlier. It just wouldn't be something that you could do. It would be the equivalent of destroying God on earth.
Hmm.
You just couldn't do that. And so, yes, I think now the separation of church and state, it is really going to take root in a whole other way once we more fully enter the Aquarian age, not only with this conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, the star of hope, as you called it, the great conjunction, as I like to call it, but it is also going to be, of course, once Pluto enters Aquarius, we're really going to see that, I think, become the norm, become so prevalent to the point where a lot of us may miss times of greater, I guess you could say, integration. There are going to be places.
Well, this is where, the struggle over truth may be with Pluto and Aquarius, right? In terms of who says what's truth and what isn't, who is the authority that determines, what is so and what isn't. I mean, what made the printing press so attractive was that you could have your own little personal, independent, individual reading of the scripture rather than relying on the priest to tell you what it means. You could read it in the privacy of your own home,
And in your own language.
and
That was,
in your own language,
yeah.
and it was a revolution. And not only that, you could read have you read the latest pamphlet? There would be pamphlets being produced about A, B, and C.
Mhm.
The news of the day. It's like it was the Twitter of the day. I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
like, the social media platform, information technology at its finest. And look what it did. We're still recovering. The 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 advantages of the time that we're in now, if we've been fortunate enough to be privileged to take full advantage of the time that we're in, um, I mean, it's phenomenal. The technology, the reach of information, just the music that one can find now, is open to you because it's all there. It's all on your streaming app. The movies that you want to watch are available somewhere. Somebody has it for rent somewhere. If there's any movie that you want to see, it's just unfathomable reach of
Now everything's streaming. Yeah. So
and
it's
the
like, yeah, it's
streaming
all stream. It's
and
all instant. Yeah.
and online research and online documents that are born digital.
Hmm.
I mean, it's a
It's
radically different.
Aquarian. Yeah, it's a
It's
completely different shift. And our friend Rick Levine, the great Rick Levine, as I like to call him, astrologer. I was in conversation with him once, and he articulated it this way. He said, if the last conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius had humanity moving from an oral culture to a written culture, it is going to be this coming conjunction that will have us going paperless. We will
right.
go from a written culture to a digital culture.
Oh, that's what I think that this whole series of Jupiter Saturn conjunctions is all about.
Yeah.
The digital life and how it will become primary on so many levels.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that, when we talk about the information age, we have barely scratched the
no, we
surface.
have, yeah, it's
Yeah.
nothing. It's nothing so
Yeah.
far.
It's going to accelerate, and in some cases really quickly, and
Yeah,
then
well,
exponentially start to
it,
accelerate.
the technology and the capabilities that we're going to have
They haven't been
over
invented yet. They're
they
going
haven't
to
been
be
invented yet.
invented with the conjunction of Jupiter
No,
and
it's
Saturn.
coming. It's
Yeah.
coming, and that's why it's hopeful. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why it's hopeful because there's so much promise in it. There's so much promise in it. I'm not saying that it's so great that human beings can't possibly mess it up. There's no such thing as an astrological thing that's so great that some human couldn't mess it up with just the right amount of effort, and similarly, there's nothing so bad that you can't find good uses for it. I mean, that's the even poisons have their purposes, right? Like it's a small amount and where it's positioned and so forth. We have to look at these things creatively for what we can do with them. But there's a lot of creative potential in something happening in the beginning of a sign, in a new sign, a new energy, a breath of fresh air after,
I'm ready
just
for it.
well, I think we all are. That's why
Yeah,
I'm writing
we
about it,
are.
because I think it's important that that the word gets out, that it's not all doom and gloom, that there is a shining light in the future. And if you go out at night, you can see the two of them getting closer. I mean, it's visible. It's visible.
Let's look at it, and every time we see them getting closer, we can just envision this sense of a new understanding, a new world that is more equal, more
Yeah.
hopeful. I
Yeah.
think that's what I'm really looking forward to, is a
Right.
greater sense of equality on every level for more people around the world.
Right.
I mean, that to me would just be the greatest thing that we could see in our lifetime.
Right. Well, that is what I think that the opportunity that alignment represents. And I think that astrologers, as much as we like to talk about the eclipses and this heavy thing and that heavy thing, if anything, 2020 demonstrated to us is that conjunctions are way more important than squares, right? Remember the Uranus Pluto square and how awful it was going to be, and it came, and stuff happened, but nothing on the scale of what 2020 has been with conjunctions.
Mhm.
That's why a conjunction is of all the aspects, and it kickstarts the whole cycle. It is the seed moment, right? It starts the whole thing. So it's what goes into this, what we see around it in terms of the virtualization of our lives is in, and the equality that will bring us, or hopefully will bring to some of us, is in the promise of that conjunction.
Yeah. And more balance, even just within us and in our own lives. I think that's part of what all this social isolation, like, to be honest, all this remote working, a lot of people have been able to take honest stock of their lives, to
Yeah.
find a greater sense of balance somewhere in there. And a part of that includes spending more time in spaces outside of just the rat race, right?
Yeah.
Having your work, but also having your friends, or maybe your family, maybe not your friends as much, but having your people, being close to your people,
Yeah.
whether it's mind, whether it's in person, being out in different spaces, in different states, in different cities, seeing how that feels. All of it ultimately is awakening people to what they truly need. And a part of it, I do think, is that sense of balance and recognizing that we are more complex than we previously were able to acknowledge, because our lives were so focused on, whether you want to call it the rat race or just doing and doing. Now we're forced to kind of say, okay, like, what do I really need? What does balance, what does happiness look like for me?
We've had this epic of history of Earth's Jupiter Saturn conjunctions in Earth. We're managing the world's resources, managing the physicality of the
But
world.
didn't we mess it up? Don't
Well,
you
we
think
did,
that?
we did,
Yeah,
we did mess it up, but that's where we put our energy in terms of
turning
of
it around.
exploiting the world, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's what we did, right? It's like greed drove it,
Yeah,
right?
all that earth energy, but now all
Right.
Aquarian energy, all that air energy, hopefully will turn it around.
Right. Well, air energy is, more equitable, more fair, more rational, more reasonable, more logical, more thinking about long term and overall context, and much more discussion and much more consensus and so forth. And who says, right? It's air is about people and relationships and interactions, making decisions, not just what happens to be worth more, the trees, or bearer bonds, giving me 20%, whatever. It's the the power of air, of reason, of logic, of cool heads, of honest negotiation, of of civilization. The benefits, the gracious manners of civilization itself in terms of the human family relating to each other. This is what we need. Why are we having these transits? Because we need to have these transits. We need an influx of air. We need an influx of rationality, in terms of the collective steeping. And cycle after cycle, generation after generation, we'll see this happen over the next 180 years of, it'll be all about air. And this conjunction, this star of hope, is the first, and not the last.
I love it. Thank you, Michael.
Oh, a great pleasure, Nadiya.
I know, regardless of how I'm editing this down, everybody should know we have been talking just like this for 2.5 hours now. And, the time just flies by with you, Michael. I love you. I miss you. I really
miss you too.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that we get to stay connected, at least online, at least in this way.
Yes.
And thank you for bringing your brilliance to my channel. So how can people find you? What are your websites?
Well, people can find me at michaelbarwick.com. That's my regular astrological website, or they can find me on Instagram as Megaspare, or they can find my sort of horoscope website, megaspare.com. Any of those places you can find me. Or you can search for my name on YouTube and you'll find me coming up on your channel.
Yeah,
right? Yes.
There you go. And I'll be sure to link in the description below all the places that you can find Michael as well. And thank you again, Michael. Thank you to everybody out there for watching, for hanging in to the end. And you will see a lot more of Michael in the weeks and months ahead, because he's my friend, because I love him, because he's brilliant, because you guys love him and you ask for him to come back again and again. We're going to continue to find ways to have Michael share in one context or another his astrological brilliance with you. Thank you again for watching, and it'll be a great conjunction. It'll be a great star of hope. Enjoy.